Today, we are diving deep into one of the most pivotal and brutal sieges in all of world history, the Mongol conquest of Samarkand in 1220. And let me tell you, this was not just a battle. This was the moment a light was snuffed out on a global center of civilization. Okay, I want you to really picture this. It's the year 1220. You're standing on the massive 40-foot-high walls of Samarkand. You glance out at the horizon, but something's wrong. It's moving. An endless churning sea of horsemen is flooding the landscape from every direction. The ground is literally trembling under your feet. This isn't just an army. It's a force of nature on the march, and it's coming right for you. So to truly get the sheer shock of that moment, the absolute terror, we've got to understand what was at stake. What exactly was the world about to lose forever? Well, back in the early 13th century, the Khwarazmian Empire was, simply put, a titan, a true global powerhouse. Its ruler, Shah Muhammad II, was so powerful, he actually called himself the Second Alexander the Great. I mean, that tells you something about his confidence. We're talking a colossal army, control over the world's most profitable trade routes. This empire was the epicenter of military might, wealth, and culture. And Samarkand? It was the crown jewel. People called it the face of the earth, and for good reason. This wasn't just another city. It was a sprawling metropolis with nearly 1 million people. Imagine libraries packed with centuries of scientific knowledge, scholars flocking from all over the known world. It was, no joke, the beating heart of a civilization at the absolute peak of its power. So how did it all come crashing down? You know, what's truly mind-blowing is that this whole world-altering catastrophe didn't start with a border dispute or some rival invasion. Nope. It all started with a single, unbelievably arrogant act that would ultimately doom millions of people. See, at first, Genghis Khan wasn't even looking for a fight. He actually wanted to do business. He sent this huge trade caravan, 450 merchants strong, basically as a massive olive branch, a way to open up peaceful trade along the Silk Road. But the governor of a border city, Ortra, accuses them all of being spies. He seizes all their valuable goods and then, with the Shah's blessing, executes every single one of them. Genghis, enraged, gives them one last chance. He sends 3 diplomats to demand justice, and the Shah's response is just unthinkable. He has the lead envoy killed on the spot. And the other 2? He has their beards shaved off, a sign of ultimate humiliation, and sends them back. Now, you have to understand, in Mongol culture, this wasn't just an insult. This was a flat-out declaration of war. For Genghis Khan, this was no longer about trade or territory. This was deeply personal. The story goes that he went up a mountain, prayed for 3 days straight, and came down with this chilling conviction. This wasn't going to be a normal war of conquest. This was going to be divine retribution. Okay, so let's get into the strategy here, because this is where we see a truly brilliant military mind go up against, well, a fatally flawed defense that was doomed from the start. Shah Muhammad made a catastrophic mistake. He was so paranoid about his own generals turning against him that he refused to gather his army for one big decisive battle. Instead, he scattered his troops across dozens of cities, thinking, hey, the Mongols are just horsemen. They can't handle a siege. A massive miscalculation. Genghis Khan, on the other hand, had just been in China, where he'd learned exactly how to take down massive fortified cities. His plan was a multi-pronged invasion designed to create maximum chaos. And this chart right here really shows you the core strategic failure. Yeah, the Shah might have had more soldiers on paper, but his forces were fragmented, static, just sitting ducks. The Mongols, even though they were outnumbered, were a single, unified, fast-moving force. It's a classic military blunder. By trying to defend everywhere at once, the Shah effectively defended nowhere. You know, it's easy to think of the Mongols as just this wave of brute force, but it was so much more sophisticated than that. It was a system, a war machine built on 3 pillars. Speed, moving so fast the enemy couldn't even communicate what was happening. Precision, using extensive spy networks to find the weakest points to strike. And maybe most important of all, terror. They deliberately spread stories of their brutality to shatter the enemy's will to fight before a battle even began. And then came the masterstroke. While his sons kept the Khwarazmian armies busy besieging other cities, Genghis Khan did the impossible. He took his main force and marched them right through the Kizilkum Desert in the dead of winter,
an area everyone considered an impassable barrier. So when his army suddenly appeared, like ghosts, deep behind enemy lines, the Shah's entire defensive strategy just collapsed overnight. So by March of 1220, the Mongols arrived at the gates of Samarkand. The city was completely isolated. No help was coming. The defenders inside were already shaken to their core by tales of Mongol terror. The crown jewel of the empire was now surrounded. A city with enough supplies to last for months, maybe even a year, fell in less than a week. On the third day, the garrison launched a desperate all-out attack to try and break the siege, even using war elephants. But this was exactly what the Mongols had been waiting for. They used their classic tactic, the feigned retreat. They pretended to run, luring the city's best soldiers further and further from the safety of the walls. And then they sprung the trap. In one single, devastating engagement, the bulk of Samarkand's professional army was just gone, wiped out. An estimated 50,000 soldiers were killed in that one failed attack. With their main fighting force destroyed and all hope of rescue lost, the city's spirit was completely broken. They opened the gates. But the city's surrender wasn't the end. Oh no. For the Mongols, this was just the beginning of a systematic, cold-blooded dismantling of an entire civilization. The remaining 30,000 soldiers were executed. The civilian population, meanwhile, was processed with a chilling, bureaucratic efficiency. If you were a skilled artisan or a scholar, you were deported to help build the Mongol Empire. Young, able-bodied men were forced to become human shields for the next siege, and women and children were enslaved and distributed among the warriors as spoils of war. The campaign that followed was one of the most destructive in all of human history. Great cities like Merv, once possibly the largest in the world, were utterly annihilated. Ancient, life-giving irrigation canals were destroyed, turning fertile farmland back into desert. The total death toll across the entire region may have reached as high as 15 million people. This was what brought the Islamic Golden Age in Central Asia to a sudden, brutal end. And what about the Shah, the so-called Second Alexander, who started this whole war with his pride? He fled. He was relentlessly pursued by Genghis's top generals across his own crumbling empire. He never stood and fought. He just ran until he had nowhere left to go, eventually dying of sickness, alone and powerless on a remote island. So you see, this wasn't just a battle. It was a fundamental turning point in world history. It's a terrifying example of how one leader's arrogance and strategic blindness, when met with a revolutionary new way of war, can completely redirect the course of history. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How different would our world be today?